Welcome to Empowered Spirit Healing. My name is Paula, and today I have a very special guest with me, Brice Watson from the YouTube channel Esoteric Atlanta. So Brice is a Ashtanga authorized yoga teacher from Atlanta, Georgia. And during lockdown, Brice started her YouTube channel, Esoteric Atlanta, where she discussed the darker side of history and lots of fun conspiracy theories. Today, we have Brice joining us to tell us a little bit about her childhood and how she got into becoming a yoga teacher. So, Brice, if you would like to just kind of start, how did your journey begin? What inspired you to go to India and live over there and actually study Ashtanga Yoga?
Well, first of all, thanks for having me on. This is so exciting. I love nerding out over this stuff, but not to sound too dramatic. I think what really initially sent me on the journey of self-discovery was just the woe is me and the perils of the world and all the stuff that, the friction that we go through. I think I was always a very sensitive child. I definitely I'm a Scorpio moon, so that, and I'm also RH negative, which we've talked about a lot on my channel, which I didn't know at the time. That was part of my own self-discovery, that RH negatives tend to, generally speaking, have a lot of like paranormal experiences happen to them. And some of that has to do with the way our eye is shaped. Like there's some very logical reasons behind that. The back of an RH negative's eye, like, but you can't see, is shaped in a diamond versus an RH positive is shaped in a circle. And so that means that RH negatives, a lot of us, like myself included, get diagnosed with a astigmatism because we see light differently, but it's not really astigmatism. It's just we're perceiving light differently. And so that explains why a lot of people who are RH negative see ghosts, see UFOs, have just a lot of stuff that they can see that like literally see because of the way their eye is shaped versus somebody else. And Paula, when growing up in the South, I'm very grateful, as I say on my channel, because my family, the deep South is very eccentric in a lot of ways. It's so humid down here that the world, it breathes basically, it's very thick air. So that, we have a huge culture of Protestantism, voodoo, and Native American that kind of merged together over time. And so I always laugh. That's my favorite part of being Southern is people go to church on Sunday morning, but they're doing voodoo on Sunday night. That's just very normal down here in the South.
Which
Right?
I love. I think that's so cool.
We praise Jesus, but we also pull some roots as well. And that's just very, there is a side of the South that's very fundamentalist, but they're kind of the minority. The majority of people in the South, especially for the female side, the women learn a lot about root work. And so even though I grew up in like a Christian home, and even though I could see things that maybe my family couldn't see, or I was experiencing things, that wasn't super taboo in a lot of ways, but yet it still made me feel, I had a lot of anxiety around it. The house I grew up in was haunted. A lot of buildings are here. My third, fourth, and fifth grade, which for us, that's our elementary school, you're 9, 10, 11, something like that, very, very little. It was in an old plantation house. Third grade was upstairs, and then fourth and fifth were downstairs. And this particular plantation house is on the edge of Atlanta. And for anybody who knows American history, Sherman burned down Atlanta during the Civil War in the mid-1800s. And Sherman had actually used this plantation house as a headquarters for his army when they were marching through Atlanta. And the problem when they got to this plantation, though, was that there was a family living there. And so the Union troops that came in, and I'll be careful what I say, they unalived the family. Because I don't want you to. They unalived the family, and there was a young teenage daughter that was, before she was unalived, I don't want to say the R word, if you guys know what I mean. She was, yeah. And so and then they actually hung her off of the banister where third grade was. And a lot of kids saw her hanging a lot. But, the teachers just kind of ignored it because that's just the South. That's just how the South is. But, I had a lot of friends growing up, like would run up and down the stairs and you would feel someone push you. And so this is just very normal in the South to experience this kind of friction. And I remember that particular building, it was a private school, so there wasn't a lot of monitoring. Like you can kind of come in and out of it as a kid. And I remember like if you left like a book in your cubby or something and you had to run in after hours, it was nerve-wracking to like be there alone in the building because of the energy that was still there from the attack on the family. And now the school I went to, it's very Yeah, they many years after I was out, I mean, I'm 41 now, so this is many years ago. The fire department came in and said, you actually can't have kids in this building because this building is so old that it's there's if the fire were to break out, then so they ended up moving the school to a different location, and I think that building is actually owned by a college now. I think it's actually on the historical registry, so they can't actually touch the building. It's a beautiful, but so that just kind of gives an example. My mom's family is from the Low Country of South Carolina, which is Charleston area. And a lot of people think of like hoodoo and voodoo being in like New Orleans, but it's actually very more present in Charleston and Savannah. It's just not talked about as much like it is in New Orleans. There's a market in New Orleans where there isn't a market. It's just there. And so these kind of things were in my peripheral growing up while I was also having these experiences with being Rh negative and seeing things that others couldn't. I also grew up in a very narcissistic society, like a narcissistic system. There was a lot of ABUSC. I don't know if that word is okay on YouTube, but there was a lot of that manipulation going on within my school specifically.
Okay.
In my opinion, is that school is an Illuminati school. That's just my opinion,
Right.
based on very, very wealthy kid, very, yeah, it's interesting. I have memories from middle school, full memories from middle school, but I don't have hazy memories from high school, which is weird because you would think it would be the opposite. But when you're stressed, sometimes your mind like blocks things out. And so there was just there's a lot of spinning parts going on within the town in which we lived in. My family's not from that town, but there's high it's one of the highest percentages of Satanism in the whole Southeast is in that particular town. And when I say Satanism, I'm not talking about like open Satanism. I'm talking about the darker side of life. And that's not my family. My family's not doesn't do, my parents don't do any of that. But I think I picked up on that a lot as a child as well. And also being O negative, with these type of rituals, they do feed off of O negatives because there's nothing in our blood. And so I think I was being so attacked, so just overwhelmed by what was going on in that town. If that makes sense, I'm sure to our audience that does make sense because we've all been studying this for a long time. And when I left for college, that's when I started to feel a little bit of liberation, a little bit of peace because I was away from that, and that's not something my parents really understood. Like whenever I would cry and I would say I could see like, I still remember like seeing like demons in the trees, like shadow figure demons swinging in the trees. And I would tell my parents that all the time. And I think they thought I was like crazy, or even though we're spooky people down here and we do wacko stuff with ghosts, just because I could see the demons doesn't mean that they could, and the interesting thing is a few years ago, one of my cousins got married in that town, and my boyfriend and I went to the wedding, and we left a little bit early. And he was driving and I was just kind of like on my phone playing, and he like slams on the brakes. And this was in a back roads part of the town that we were the only car out there. He just like slams on the brake and he was like, what the fuck was that? And I look up and I go, what? He goes, a black shadow person just ran across the road. I thought I hit it. And he got out of the car and like walked around, and he got back in. I was like, oh, it's fine. I was like, they live here. I was like,
yeah, this is just normal.
they're not human. You didn't kill it. I was like, I used to see them as kids all the time. They just live here in this town. I was like, they're not good. So let's just keep on driving. But you didn't. But that actually was very validating for me because I didn't even know if I had told him that story at that point of what I used to see, is that he knew I didn't like the town. He doesn't like the town either. He had experiences in that town before we even met that he didn't really like. He wasn't comfortable there.
Okay.
But when he said that, I was just kind of like, oh yeah, I'm not crazy. Like you saw it too, but he's Rh negative as well. So yeah, that's just kind of like my childhood, just kind of, I grew up in a very wealthy family. My mom's family, the Brices, where I get my name from, they're a huge medical family in South Carolina, many generations. My dad's family, my dad's mom's family is a very prominent family from South Georgia. That's my only real Georgia link. So there was a lot of pressure as well from that regard, is when you're in that old aristocratic, and I think this is true from any culture. Like if your family is like old money, there's this pressure too of maintaining a certain
lifestyle.
Yeah, a certain and when you're questioning all of these things, and when you're actually as a child being like, this is not adding up, like this thing called life is not adding up, you don't fit in when it comes to that, because most people are happy just to go along with the plan, we'll say it,
the plan. Yeah, absolutely.
Yeah.
Wow. Yeah. And so I can totally understand why you would like to kind of branch out of your hometown and kind of find somewhere where you feel a bit of relief, really, on an energetic level. So how were you kind of inspired to go to India and to study yoga? Like what kind of got you in that direction?
Well, it's interesting. And Ram Dass, who's one of my favorite, he's now passed away. He's one of my favorite spiritual teachers. I love his books. And there's in one part in one of his books, he talks about how sometimes our lives seem so disorganized. Like we don't know why certain things are happening or where we're going. But when we actually turn around and look back, you can see how everything was building up and putting you in a position for what is your dharma, which is like your life purpose. And so the getting to India, when I was a kid, even though I was experiencing all this weird stuff, again in the 90s, 80s and 90s in Georgia, there was not a whole yoga wasn't really a thing in the Western world at that point. It was not really, so I didn't grow up with this idea of like yoga. Like that was not ever, I grew up again with the voodoo stuff and like tarot card, like that kind of stuff. But that's all, but the actual like yoga was not really anything I knew about. I took my first yoga class when I was like 18, and it was a vinyasa flow class. And I remember thinking, this is the weirdest stuff I've ever done in my whole entire life, but I felt so good when I was done. And at that point, we were kind of talking off air. I've always been pretty active physically. My mother was a big tennis player. My sister, actually, that's why I was in Australia. My sister played in the Australian Junior Opens when she was young, so that's why I spent a lot of time in Australia. I love Australia. My dad, my dad still holds records for swimming, so I come from a pretty athletic family, active family. So my mother was always dieting, so she was always doing workout videos, and I was a runner. I'm pretty athletic, but I was never competitive. In that sense, like I didn't like sports. I still don't like sports, but I loved running cross country, which was a sport that I did. But I didn't. But the reason why I bring this up is because what was happening for me, I didn't realize at the time, was I was meditating. That's why I like to run. It was a mental meditation for me, and I didn't even know what meditation meant at that age, because I wasn't interested in winning the race. I couldn't have cared less if my team won or not. I could not have cared less what my time was. I just wanted to run. And I liked being that point of being. And when you're running cross country, it's very in the zone, very in your body, that runner's high. When you're running cross country, when you're on a team, you don't listen to music. You can't, because it's just, so you have no music. So you're just running and you're getting in that rhythm and that breath, and the mind gets focused. So looking back, I would say that was when I was running cross country, that was my first really introduction into yoga, even though I didn't know it at the time. So then I go off to school. I ran through for pleasure all through school, for just to run. And then as I started to get into my 20s, I definitely started to view exercise the way maybe my mother viewed it. I started to, as your body starts to change, and it became, okay, well, I need to go run because I need to be skinny, or I need to fit into a certain pair of pants. It became like a punishment, which we were talking off camera. I do think that there is a conspiracy that I think that the world has done that to us. And so I ended up after school, and I moved out to Los Angeles, having some like physical issues from running, because I was overdoing it. Like I was getting stress fractures in my feet. There was just some stuff that my body was basically telling me, you're doing too much. And I actually remember when I got one fracture in my foot, the doctor saying to me, like, and I was offended by this back then, but now I'm not. Again, this was years ago. I know today this probably wouldn't sound PC, but I understand what he was saying. For a male's body, men are very, linear. They're very pranic. They don't have hips like we do. They're designed to go for miles on end running. But for a female's body, because our hips are bigger, it can overdoing it can cause issues because your body's not really in, skeletally speaking, is not in that balanced state to be able to run for long distance. And if you look at, professional runners, they are actually do have very small hips. So they're not, their body is actually kind of designed that way. However, I am O negative, and O negatives do have more energy. So we do tend to like doing these endurance type of activities. And so when I got a really bad break in my foot and I couldn't run anymore, I noticed when I was forced not to run, I lost a lot of the inflation in my body. All of a sudden, my body started to actually feel better. Now, at this point, I was still doing yoga occasionally while I was running, and I saw it more as like a good stretch for the running. But then when I noticed that started to happen, and of course, other things were happening in my life in your 20s, breakups, moving. We went to a massive recession in 2008. So there was also emotional, stressful stuff going on for that young of an age. So that was kind of really starting to peel back the onion of realizing that the physical body and what we do to our bodies do impact us spiritually as well. So, as time goes on, I end up moving back to Georgia. I actually was going to move to New York City, but I came back to Georgia as like a pause for a moment because the recession was bad. I loved LA sometimes, but I'm more of like a New York person anyway. And so I was like, I'm going to move to New York. We've had this recession. I'm still in my 20s at this time. I'm going to start over in New York. I have a cousin lives in New York City. But I came to Atlanta for like a bit of a break, a pause. And at that point, that's when I really started to investigate yoga. And I was doing all these vinyasa flow classes because that's all I knew of. That's the main yoga you see around in the United States and elsewhere in the Western world. And I started to actually study the philosophy. So I started to study the Yoga Sutras, and I just was curious, like yoga was getting bigger at this point. It was more common. I was like, what is this weird stuff? Because I'm a weirdo. Let's investigate this. And I started to realize that the yoga scripture, was not actually matching what was happening in a vinyasa flow class. They were contradicting each other. And I started to have some questions about this. Like I would ask people like, why does it say this here, but you're saying this in class? These are contradictory theories. I'm reading here that Patanjali is actually saying that yoga happens when we are uncomfortable, when there's friction. But yet in your class, you're telling me to get comfortable. So how is the yoga supposed to happen if I'm doing what I want in class? This is weird to me. And I got so frustrated at this time that I almost quit practicing. And what's that verse in the Bible that says, ask and you shall receive, seek and you shall find, knock and the door shall be open unto you? I met my first Ashtanga teacher. And this was a guy, Gary Jones. I called him my yoga dad. He's awesome. He's not an authorized teacher, but he was kind of teaching the primary series. And I had this conversation with him, and he was the one person out of all these yoga teachers that could answer my questions, that could acknowledge, you're right. You're absolutely right. The Vinyasa flow world is not actually following yoga. It's not yoga. You're right. You're correct. But there is this thing called traditional yoga, which I didn't even know at that point that Vinyasa flow wasn't traditional. I didn't know at that point that Vinyasa flow is not from India, that's an American thing or a Western thing.
Yeah, because we're just not exposed to that information.
No, we're not.
So unless you kind of look into it and deep dive into it, you don't realize
that there is yoga from India. That's actual yoga. And then there's this corrupt form of yoga, which is called Vinyasa flow, which is definitely a corrupt form of yoga. And so he walked me through primary series, the whole of primary series in one class, which you typically don't do. Typically you learn it over 10 years, but the first time. And because I was so athletic, because in primary series, yoga chikitsa is physical therapy. So I was already kind of conditioned to do it. And at that point I found, I started really investigating Ashtanga Yoga. I started practicing it daily. I found David Garrigues, who was my big teacher from Philadelphia. He was one of the 47 people. So I'm authorized. There are 500 of us who are authorized. There's 47 people who are certified. The certified people like lived in India for 10 years. Like, they're big deals. And so he became my actual teacher. And I would fly back and forth to Philadelphia, and I would go and take his workshops, his courses. I would do intensives with him. So I was studying with David Garrigues, and I started to emotionally really get into my body, which I had
Mhm.
kind of not really ever done. And I know that sounds weird. Most people, now that I'm a teacher, I recognize that most people aren't in their bodies. Most people are not. They're trying to like disassociate from, it's that kind of
Yeah.
like, I don't want to be here. This is hard. This life is hard. If I can pull out of my body, then I can like pretend I'm not here, which we call
Yes.
disassociation. And I started to realize that the more I got into my body, the more I could handle stress better and the better control I had over my paranormal stuff that was happening to me. It kind of started to subside more because I was actually, and I think what was happening is because I was in my body and I was actually confronting stress.
Uh-huh.
The entities that I could see that maybe caused me stress didn't have as much power anymore, because I was actually owning myself.
Yeah.
And then I started to look at the philosophy of Prakriti and Purusha, which is I talk about all the time. That's a huge thing in the Yoga Sutras, where we
Mhm.
are, and that was my first dark night of the soul. When you start to realize, like what Patanjali is saying, is that your identity, your physical nature, is actually not who you are. Like this is just a temporary experience. So my blood type, my family, my culture, for all of us, this is just a temporary experience for your soul to refine itself, but your soul isn't that. And so that was basically kind of my first journey into really, really adapting this into not just something that I would end up doing for a living, but and any authorized teacher, this isn't just something we do for a living. This is like our life. This is
Yeah.
basically how we live our life. And so at that point, I had been practicing with David for a really long time, and I'd never felt, even though traveled, like I was a huge traveler, been everywhere, I never really considered going to India. But I wanted to go study at the main shala. I just felt this really desire to go to India, to take the next step, to go to the main shala in India and study. And the thing about the
Okay.
main shala in India is that when you go there, it's set up, it's kind of like you're going back to university. You have all these other classes, Sanskrit, philosophy, chanting, it's not just the postures, and you're up at 2 o'clock in the morning. I mean, it's not easy. Um, and the thing about it is like when you go there, you're not necessarily going to get authorized. You don't just finish all these credits
The
and then get your,
guarantee.
yeah, there's no guarantee. The Parm guru, so for me it was Sharat Joyce, who's recently just passed away. He decides who, he just gives people the authorization. So when I had this longing to go to India, it was more for myself, and I knew it was going to be even harder. Now, Ashtanga Yoga, for those who are not familiar with the Ashtanga practice, it is incredibly difficult. Like I said, it takes 10 years to get through primary series for most people. A lot of leg behind the head stuff, a lot of forward and back handsprings, we call TikToks, a lot of catching your ankles. It is there's a lot of contortion in it. Now, with that being said, you build up to that. Like the tightest person can come into the room that can't even touch their toes, and we work with you where you are. So you don't have to be, in fact, the most important thing is that you're strong. Flexibility takes a back seat to that. But it's just working. And my boyfriend says it best. This was long before I met my boyfriend, but he had been in this Ashtanga world prior, but that's how we met, but I hadn't met him yet. And he says that the reason why there's 6 different series in the system is so that everyone is challenged, so that every person finds challenge, because that's the yoga, right? Is finding the challenge. And like, I mean, listen, most people won't even make it past second series. So Sharat was the only person living who had finished all 6 series. So I mean, I always tell people fourth series looks like an exorcism. I have a hard time watching fourth series because it makes me want to puke seeing how it's
Oh,
yeah. So and you don't see that a lot. Like
thanks.
you don't see
No.
fourth series a lot. You only really see it in India because it's so extreme. It's so extreme. Um, so nonetheless, though, it's kind of like going on an ayahuasca dieta trip, right? You're not going for fun. You're going to
Yeah.
have your like
Big
your
commitment.
you're going to get torn apart, and you're signing up for this. And also when you're in India as well, especially for a Westerner, whether you're American, Canadian, Australian, European, the culture is so different. And
Mhm.
I mean, I've been in different cultures before, but when you're enrolled in school there, you're not just there visiting. Like if you're just a
Yeah.
tourist, it's different. But when you're actually enrolled in a school and you're there for a long period of time, you you're not there just experiencing the culture from a tourist perspective. You're there experiencing the culture because you live there. And
Yeah.
that might sound weird, but that's also part of that becomes part of your practice too.
Yeah.
Because
That makes sense.
I remember like the first
Well,
week
you're
I was there,
just seeing all the sights.
yeah, it's very, just having to adapt to a very different way of living. So you're getting
Mhm.
up at 2 o'clock in the morning, you're getting your butt kicked, you're taking all these philosophy classes, you're having to bucket wash your clothes. On my first
Yeah.
trip, there was no washing machine. I didn't know how to bucket wash. I had to learn how to fucking bucket wash my clothes. Like I'm still not great at it. My second trip, they finally had washing machines available, but
Thank
so
goodness.
yeah, like you're literally trying to wash your clothes.
Hmm.
There's you're on scooters and rickshaws, and the food is very different. So I get deli belly. Everybody gets a little sick at one point. It's just a lot of sensory overload while you're also in a very fragile place anyway because so it's
And
not.
pushing yourself to a physical limits,
Yeah.
and learning all of the philosophy as well.
Yep.
Hmm.
And meeting new people. When I went my first trip to
Yep.
India, I didn't know anybody. Like I knew my yoga friends back in America, but I didn't know anybody. And I kind of refer it to the military, and I apologize if this is offensive to any military people, but the people you end up meeting in India, because you've been through so much together,
Hmm.
you are bonded for life. And
Yeah.
so my first trip, I ended up making one of my best friends, a guy named Chris. We'll talk about him later too, because he's gonna be doing stuff with us, and we literally were next door neighbors. Our apartments were right beside each other. My
Okay.
first trip, and we became like the best of friends, and we still
Oh,
are. And I think it's just because you're just kind of clinging to each other
yeah.
because Canadian. So we're both from the American continent. We're kind of clinging to each other because this is hard.
Yeah.
And
An emotional roller coaster ride.
right, we're both as the same amount of jet lag because we're from the same time zone. There's just so much going on. And funny story. So he's gay. And my first trip, I've been to Indian hospital twice. My first trip I got a kidney infection, and I got some laughing about it because I got sick and my fever got so high that I was like hallucinating in the bed. And so he saw that and he was like, I have to get you to the hot, like something's not right. I thought I was just like deli belly. And so I
Yeah.
remember him like kind of picking me up, putting me in rickshaw, taking me to the hospital. Well, because I'm a woman, he had to actually check me in because he's a man.
Oh,
So I couldn't
wow.
check myself in as a woman in India. And so there in this town in India, it might be different in North India, but in this town there's still
Yeah.
kind of some very old cultural stuff. And on the form it said who is your owner. So as a woman, it was either your father, your husband, or your brother who was your owner.
Wow.
Well, my friend Chris he's Canadian, but his parents are from Vietnam. So he's Asian, even though he's Canadian. So he can't be my brother. He can't be my father. So we had to put that he was my husband.
Oh,
But he is
right.
so gay that I remember even being like as sick as I was, getting kind of chuckled at this because I was like, are they buying this?
It's so funny.
Are you buying that he's actually my like?
They're probably kind of used to it.
Yeah, like right. And as long as he could check me in, and when I was there for a few days because I ended up having it was a kidney infection, and I didn't know that though until I was discharged, and he had
Wow.
to my friend Chris had to discharge me, and the
Wow.
crazy thing is all those days in the hospital, this will be wild for the Americans. All the procedures I had, all the medication, it only cost me. It was like 3 days in the hospital. It only cost me like $50 US, which in America that would be like what, $50,000? Like, so that's
Wow.
so I had all these rupees on me, and so Chris comes to get me, and I give him the rupees so that he can pay because he has to pay them. I can't pay them. He has to pay them, and I still have no idea what's wrong with me. Like I have no idea. I'm being discharged. They won't tell me like what was wrong with me. I have my list to get
Wow.
my medication from the pharmacy, and we're walking out, and I'm like, what's wrong with me? He goes, oh, he's like, bitch, you had a kidney infection. It's like
Wow.
they literally did. I had no idea. So then I go to get my antibiotics and stuff. We go to and I didn't. It's all written in Kannada. So I don't know what any of these drugs are. I have no idea. I'm just trusting that these are antibiotics, you know. And so I take everything home and I'm taking my dose every day of these, like I have 4 different medicines, 4. And all of a sudden I get to back to practice. My teacher knew and I'm back in practice, and they're being really easy on me because they knew I had been in the hospital.
Mhm.
But all of a sudden I'm starting to feel really good. Like I'm feeling fabulous. Like I'm in the shala. I'm looking across the room at all my shala mates, and I'm just feeling nothing but love for all of them. Well, we have
Oh,
this thing in yoga where we talk about like sickness and fevers, or we call it the yoga fever. Like these are necessary. Like sicknesses are necessary because it burns karma. And so I've
okay.
got this idea in my head that this kidney infection that I had, so now I know I had a kidney infection. Now I'm taking my antibiotics to kind of close it out. And I'm thinking, this kidney infection, I must have found enlightenment. Like this
Yep.
must have been like the sickness I needed to burn off whatever karma so that I could find,
Yep.
I'm
It's
feeling
all just
just
gone.
fabulous. Like I've never felt this good in my life. Life is beautiful. I have no hate in my heart. So then I go back to my next Sanskrit class after being away, and I'm looking at the
Mhm.
board and I'm realizing at this moment that I actually cannot, the board is blurry. Like I literally can't make out what's on the board. And I'm like, huh, this is weird. So I get back home and I'm looking at my medication, and they give you it in the United States. When you get medication, they take the prescription from you, but they give it back to you in India. So I still had the paper
Okay.
here, and I'm looking at my all my line of medications, and I'm like, no, no, these are all antibiotics, right? Like, you know, in America, when they give you like a narcotic for pain, they talk to you about it. They ask you if you have any type of allergies or if you have any addictions before they give you any type of narcotics. And I thinking that that's probably what they do. That's probably what they do. But no, no, that's not what they do. So I go to my Sanskrit teacher the next day, and I hand him the paper. Lakshmish, I
Mhm.
hand him and I said, Lakshmish, which one of these is not like the other? And he looks at it and he points to it and he goes, that's a narcotic. Paula, I had been high as F for
Oh.
like a week on these narcotics, these pink, thinking that they were all just antibiotics. Now, the other
Yep.
2 were, but this one was a painkiller that they had given me for the pain.
Yep.
And it worked. It worked. I didn't
It
feel any
worked.
pain.
And you felt that you'd reached enlightenment.
I was like, and I sat there and I was like, and I looked at Lakshmish and he kind of looked at me and he made this realization. And I was like, okay. And he was like, all right. He didn't call me for like 3 days, thank God, because I think he knew that I was high and that I needed to like now come off. And I just didn't know that I had
Oh,
been taking it.
oh. So,
So
like, was that a bit of a bad come down?
no, it wasn't that bad. I think I found it
Okay.
so funny. Like I think in retrospect, and I did ended up like taking it at night just to help me like sleep because I was still a little uncomfortable from the infection. So and I think
Mhm.
that's probably what they intended it for, was like when you're at home at night, take it so you
And
can
when you're asleep,
rest.
not when you're practicing yoga
Not
at
when you're
2 o'clock in the
practicing. And
morning.
I my friend Jorn, who is from Norway, I had this memory. I don't know if I've ever told him this, but this is when I was high, when I didn't know I was high. I remember like, you know, when you've been practicing Ashtanga for so long, you know the sequencing like the back of your hand. Like it's like Mary Had a Little Lamb. We all know that song without even thinking about it. But I remember being there and like being confused as to where I was in the practice, but
All
being like,
right.
this must be what enlightenment means. Like, I just don't need to know the practice anymore because I'm enlightened now. And I remember looking at Jorn, like having this look at Jorn, like, I just love this guy. He's just so nice. Like, I just have this thought, like, in the shala when I don't think I've ever told Jorn that. So if you're watching this, Jorn, I like remember, like, we were on the same row and I remember looking over, like, twisting and, like, seeing Jorn and just being like, he's just such a nice guy. Like, just having this, like,
He's just probably looking at you like, what is your
he was
problem?
just practicing, and I was like having this like, he's just so kind.
Epiphany of just love.
Love him. I'm so glad
Gratitude.
I've met him. He's just so kind. I had no idea I was high as F. Like I was high as a just no idea I was
Oh,
high.
so funny.
So yeah, so that's kind of, you know, that's a funny story from India. So that's kind of my first trip. And then I ended up I just kept going back. Like I kept enrolling and going back and going back. And the thing about Sharad is so many people when he was alive, so many people would go to India for like a month just to
Mhm.
experience it and never go back. And so the first month that you're in India, he doesn't pay you much attention. But over time, when you stick around, he starts to get to know you. And if he gets to know your name, then that's a pretty big deal. And so he got to know my name and in my first trip. And so that was a pretty big deal. And then, over a few years, he calls me to his office and he gives me authorization. And so then I start, which was also was very, very, I very, that was, I am the only female in the state of Georgia to be authorized. And so that's a pretty big deal. And the fact that he trusts me to teach this means a lot to me. And I take it very seriously. And because this has changed my life so much. And it made me realize, Paula, like we see it a lot, in the law of one, which I'm a student of the law of one as well, they talk about third density planets, and we're on a third density planet. Most third density planets don't have language. They don't have actual language. They speak telepathically.
Really?
Yeah, we're the only one of the only third density planets that actually has language.
I didn't realize that.
Yeah, in the law of one, they say that that's actually dumbed down a lot of our psychic abilities because we rely on language. We still have them, but we don't rely, they're not fine-tuned, right?
Yeah.
Because we speak. And so when I started to really, again, going deep into my spiritual practice and then becoming a student of the laws one as well, and really understanding Prakriti and Purusha, I started to realize that a lot of these, like, tarot card reading, all that kind of stuff, that this is actually not, this is like communication. This is a form of communication. These are, but the actual spiritual practice is knowing your own spirits. Like the Cassiopeians laugh about talking to dead dudes. Like we think if we talk to dead dudes that we're spiritual, channeling ghosts. But it's actually getting to know your own spirits. It's your own soul that is the actual spiritual practice. And I started to really see even more so, especially in lockdown in 2020, and it all leads, we're all on the path we need to be on. And I got authorized and I was assisting my boyfriend. He's one of the biggest teachers down here in the Southeast. He's owns Ashtanga Yoga Atlanta. And once I got authorized, he was like, you need to do your own program now. There's too many cooks in the kitchen, basically. So I went to the suburbs, I started a program, and then my program was building, and then all of a sudden we had lockdown. So, and that studio went under because a lot of businesses couldn't survive lockdown. And so that's when I opened up my YouTube channel with really no intention of talking about yoga, just talking about the other fun stuff, the conspiracies, the urban legends. But then I started realizing, like with the law of one and where we are in the world and where we are on the timeline and the ascension, all that kind of stuff, I started to realize how many people were being misled about spirituality.
Yes.
And how they think they're stuck in the ultimate, the foundation of spirituality is you're confused. That's what the original definition of sin is, right? To miss the mark, to not know who you are. I think I'm Brice. You think you're Paula. But that's not who we are eternally.
Yeah.
And that's the reincarnation too. You think about all the different lives you've lived, right? What's the consistent, the common denominator is the soul. Which isn't any of these experiences. The soul has created these experiences. These experiences are super important. Like, I don't want to confuse that. Like, these experiences and these lives and being in our bodies, that's why we're here, is to have these experiences. But understanding that these experiences are not permanent. They're temporary. And so what I saw was people who didn't understand that basic concept were falling even more into delusion. Because they were started to identify more and more and more and more with the ego, the false sense of self, and not actually understanding that the soul is what's really important. And we see that too a lot with projection. I love the truther community, but I started to get very concerned with the truther community because it became a lot of projection. It became a lot of cult-like behaviors. And I started to worry, like, once we get the bad guys of the world are gone, who's going to be the next group you're going to target? Because if you don't work on yourself, if you don't face yourself, you're never going to accept that you might be the problem in your life. And it's always going to be somebody else's fault. But somebody who's worked on themselves, first of all, they're not going to be likely to go into vigilante violence. They're going to want law and order. They're going to want to discern certain things. once we get rid of the bad guys of the world, if you've worked on yourself, then you're going to be able to see your part in it, right? You're going to be able to say, okay, that's gone, but I have to face my own karma too. I don't need to project this onto somebody else.
Yeah.
And so I started talking more and more about this and the whole idea of ascension. Knowing the truth about the world. I think this is where people get confused too. Knowing the truth about the world, knowing what's really going on in the world with our governments, the establishment, will say, I'm trying to be the Illuminati, as I like to say on YouTube because of the words. Knowing the truth about that doesn't mean anything spiritually. It means nothing. The bad guys also know the truth.
Yeah.
What matters is you and the choices you're making in the work that you're doing. There are lots of people in the world today who are completely unaware of the establishment who will ascend positive.
Mm-hmm.
Right? So it doesn't, and I started to really pull back a little bit on that, talk more about that on my YouTube channel, just to give this education kind of to people to be like, hey, you need to like be in your body. And that's where we get to the exercise element of yoga and the running I was doing. Your body is the Shakti. So it's not your soul, but it's the expression of your soul. And when we talk about karma, I think people in the Western world have a misunderstanding of karma. Karma is everything's karma. Like the fact that I have Zoom and we have Zoom, that the karma of that is that Paula, who's in Australia, and me, who's an American, can have this conversation. That's the karma. So it's just cause and effect. That's all it is. I drink water, so therefore the karma is I have to pee. Right? Like it's just cause and effect. That's all it is. And the most important thing, though, for us to evolve is to not attach to the karma, to stand for what we believe in, but have equanimity around it. But with the karma of our work, so the things that we are attached to, that our soul has been attached to in past lives or whatever, comes through as karma within our life today. And a lot of that is played out through our body, right? It's like, and you know this the body, there's a great book, The Body Keeps the Score, or he talks about how, that's not a spiritual book. It is a spiritual book, but it's not labeled that. It's literally how the body
holds on to the different traumas that we've been through. Yeah.
And the traumas are lingering because of attachment. Now, when I say that, I'm attached to my trauma too. I'm not saying that that's a bad thing. That's actually part of the lesson, right? That's actually has a purpose, right? For you to explore that, what we call friction. And so I use the analogy a lot with a match. A match has everything it needs, just the singular match. It has everything it needs to light itself, but it can't light itself unless it's struck up against the matchbook. So that trauma, that friction, that stress is that striking of that matchbook. The more your heart breaks, the more the light can shine through, right? And so a lot of people misunderstand spirituality as being all light and love. Well, we call that toxic positivity. Actually, spirituality is really dark because you have to face yourself.
Yeah, you have to face all your shadows and really go in and look at all those parts of yourself that you don't like and that you don't want to face. And the fact that accepting that there is darkness in you and that you have the potential to do things that you would normally be very ashamed of.
Absolutely.
It is. It's quite scary. It's quite scary to go there. And so I think it's so much easier for people to just distract themselves and say, oh, that person over there is bad. That person over there is evil. They're doing this, they're doing that. So, yeah, because I'm just very curious so you've been on YouTube for nearly 5 years now. And just with the whole truther movement, yeah, I've really noticed your growth from when you first kind of started to where you are now and how you have evolved. And I love how you have kept all your videos up, except ones that have been taken down by YouTube, not by you. and just your journey and what you've learnt along the way has been very powerful and inspirational, I think, for people to see that. Yeah.
Well, I think what happens to Paula is this group of people, the establishment, will say some of the things they do are so freaking awful and horrible that I think people have that instant reaction of anger and of disgust and of that, as I said, that vigilantism. But when we step back and we look at the situation as a whole, we look at how complex human beings are, like just because somebody was born into a particular family doesn't mean that they are following the path of that. We have to look at individuals as a whole. And,
Yeah.
We were texting last night, well, last night for me, early morning for you, this morning about Wicked. And we were talking about Ariana Grande and Cynthia Erivo and how emotional they've been. And I said to you, that apparently that tends to happen to any women who play these parts on Broadway and the West End, is they do get kind of a close and emotional, they have to. But I said to you, I was thinking a lot about it, all the while Wicked was being filmed, starting in 2021, Hollywood was coming down during this time. And they took them like 3 years to film this movie, right? And these women, a lot of people want to be quick to judge. It's Ariana Grande, so of course she's in this. And I'm like, do we really know that for sure? Or is she a victim of this system?
Yeah. 100%.
And could these women be so emotional because they not only were going through emotional parts in this story, but at the same time, their lives were also parts of I don't want to say falling apart, I think probably falling together. And the fact that they're still out there promoting this movie probably means that they haven't done the things that maybe their peers have done.
Yeah,
Could that emotion
absolutely.
be tied to a deeper wound?
Yep.
I don't know.
Yeah.
And
And
so,
maybe that's just really bonded them together so that
yeah,
they could just get through it together.
I mean, think
Yeah.
about everything that's being exposed with, we'll just say the
Oh,
rapper. So I don't know if I can say his
yeah.
name, the rapper, the American rapper, and
Mhm.
with that island in the Caribbean, and then so all these things that these girls potentially might have gone through as younger children in this industry, especially Ariana Grande, with we have that whole
Being on set.
Nickelodeon expose, Quiet
Yeah.
on the Set. There's reasonable probability that especially Ariana Grande has possibly gone through
Yeah.
something
There's
horrific.
been some trauma there. Yeah.
I don't know for sure. I don't know that, but I can reasonably assume at this point that she probably has, as a child, she was a child actor.
Mhm.
But that doesn't mean that she herself has done anything wrong.
Yeah.
And that doesn't mean that she is not a talented. I mean, she was great. She was unbelievably talented. And that doesn't mean that her talent should be celebrated. So
Mhm.
so you think about that, like before all of these exposés on Hollywood and these people, all of these actresses, especially child actors, they had to keep their mouths shut. No
Yeah.
one would believe them.
They would have been threatened.
Exactly. And
Mhm.
now all of a sudden it's all coming out. Everyone knows now about. So I look at that, I'm like, is it possible that this over emotional response we're seeing from these women might have been triggered by the work, by Wicked, by the story, but could it be
Yeah.
also even consciously or subconsciously tapping into a deeper release
Yeah.
and so that's kind of, I think that's why I kind of started to pull away from the truth of the world. I also started seeing people saying things that were very terrifying about how we should unalive children of certain
Yeah.
people. And I thought, wait a
Yeah.
minute, what about
Yeah.
saving
That's
the
not okay.
children? So you're
Mhm.
telling me like the royal kids who are children,
Yeah.
you think they should be removed from this, but we're about saving the children. At this
Exactly.
point, they're victims.
Just
Just
because they're born into that family doesn't, actions speak louder than words. They're little kids that haven't even had a chance to act
right.
yet.
Right, exactly. They don't legally, even if they're being forced to do things by their families, by behind closed doors, legally in most countries, they're not autonomous people. They're
No.
children. So that started to really freak me out. I
Yeah.
started to get really freaked out. Again, I'm RH negative. There's a huge hate campaign on TikTok now about RH negatives. So I'm like, you guys are acting
Oh.
like World War. I know we can't see the N word. The Yahtzees will say this is what the Yahtzees believed. And that's
Mhm.
when I started speaking out even more. Like, this is so like a blood type, that's just the nature of you. That's not who you are. So if you're
Yeah.
judging someone by their blood type, that's no different than judging someone by the color of their skin.
Yeah.
Right. And so I started to see and then I started to realize that there are opposing forces. not sorry, controlled opposition. Opposing forces, that's what we deal with in our own selves, but controlled opposition in the truther community, where the bad guys knew people were going to wake up, and so they knew these people weren't doing work on themselves, and so they started to harvest that hate in them and that evil. And I've seen more evil in the truther community than I think I've seen from the establishment at this point.
Isn't it insane? Yeah, it's like that with the religious community too.
Yep.
That they can be so judgmental and so harsh, and it's like, you're supposed to be following Jesus, you're supposed to be kind and loving your neighbors as yourself, and yet they can be the most judgmental of all.
Oh yeah, I've gotten many unaliving threats, we'll say, from truthers, mostly from truthers. I had one email when I started speaking about my yoga experience in India, where somebody was like, you should be sent to Gitmo and unalived because you're promoting yoga. This is a truther. Because I'm not doing what you think I should do. I'm not hurting anybody. Regardless of whether you think yoga is good, whatever you think about, I'm not hurting anybody.
Yeah.
But because I'm not, and I know when people do that, it's because it's a psychological thing where they're afraid that what they believe in isn't true. And so they have to force other people to bend to their will in order to feel more comfortable in their own beliefs. When you're comfortable with what you believe in, you're not going to care what other people believe.
No, and you don't feel the need to force it on anybody.
No.
It's like, I know what's true for me. And, you know, look it or leave it.
And I know and I know that, you know, God is very much, I mean, part of yoga is total submission to God, is being able, like they even talk about, like when you have things like anxiety, which I struggle with anxiety, that kind of stuff, that shows you that you're out of alignment with God, because you're fearful when, if you have total faith in your creator, then you won't have anxiety because you know that there's a purpose for everything. That's what the Yoga Sutras are talking about. And so God is at the center focus of the Yoga Sutras. And when we are too attached to our false sense of self, then we can't connect with God, because the false sense of self, the illusionary part, which is super important, it has its place, is what's kind of blocking us. Is when we rest into our soul, that we can then connect with the peace of God and trust that our lives are going to unfold the way that they need to unfold in God's will. And so that, you know, but even though that caused even more, I became a very controversial truther, because I wasn't out there saying, let's get them all, because I was saying, hey, wait a minute, we got to like sit back for a moment and we got to like look at these things, because not everybody in Hollywood is bad. Not every politician is bad. Not everything in our government is bad. Not everything in medicine is bad.
Exactly.
I became very controversial because I didn't, and then I started to notice the cult behavior from the truther community. I started realizing people were putting their faith completely in Trump and in Kennedy, and I'm that. Listen, I voted for the guy. Like, I totally so happy he's where he is. But as a yoga person, I know that he can't save me.
No,
I have to save myself.
Absolutely.
And in the grander scheme of the collective we're all going through, we all have parts to play, but we're all equal. Like, you're equal to Trump. We all have a part to play. That's his part to play. That's his karma. This is my karma. This is Paula's karma. This is your karma. And we can respect each other. Like, I would probably cry if I met Trump. I'd probably hug him for everything he's gone through.
I would too.
I mean, like, God bless the man. But I still understand that that's my gratitude towards him for his job. But I know that on the side of light, we're all equal. And he acts that way as well. He talks about that too. But I started noticing these people were like sitting back, eating their bonbons, watching TV, waiting for a damn med bed, which we know med beds come from the darkness. That's not something of the light. Waiting for Nasara, not doing anything to like better themselves. And I'm like, you are actually going into service to self. You are acting selfishly. It's all about, I would get on these Telegram channels and I would hear people talk about these med beds. And I'm like, how effing dare you? You live, especially for the Americans and any Western person, you have the ability. You have a roof over your head. You have food in your cabinet. You have clean water to drink. And you have the ability to put your sneakers on and go for a walk. The kids that while I was in India, also opened up a foundation for slum kids. When you are in the slums and you see those kids living in trash houses. Trash houses made of literal trash.
Yeah,
Where
they're the ones that need the
right,
med bed.
they're the ones.
They're the ones that need the help. They're the ones that need the Nasara Gazara.
Exactly. They're the ones, they you know, that whole saying, doesn't have a pot to piss in. They literally don't have a pot. They don't have a bathroom. They have to go to the bathroom outside like an animal.
Mm-hmm.
They've never had any type of health care. But for some reason, and I get passionate about this. I'm like, your sorry, entitled, selfish ass thinks that you deserve the med bed first.
Mm-hmm.
When there are children, when you have the ability to get yourself healthy now, they don't. And that really started to upset me a lot when I started to see that, because I thought, how, especially with the Americans, because I mean, like Australia, I feel my first trip into the slums humbled me so much that I thought, how dare I? Like, here I am, all upset because I don't have the newest iPhone, or the plane ticket was a little bit more expensive than I wanted it. I sat there my first trip into the slums and I thought, I'm gonna get emotional. I was like, I just cannot believe how much of a brat I've been, because I've been so blessed to be born in the United States of America. Anybody who's born into a Western country, the poverty you see in America is nothing. The poverty in America is the Ritz-Carlton compared to the poverty there.
Yeah,
And
it's so heartbreaking. Yeah.
it's so heartbreaking. And I'm thinking, I remember one trip we went out there, we got a bunch of rice, because when you are a Westerner and you're in India, you're wealthy. You have a lot of, even if you're poor in your country, you're wealthy in India.
Yeah, compared
And
to there. Yeah.
we went and got bags and bags and bags and bags of rice to bring to the slums, because rice is like one of their main dishes. And the government's supposed to bring this, but they never do. The government doesn't. India's government's very corrupt, like most governments. So we had a rickshaw driver, Mahesh, that would go with us because he could translate for us. And my boyfriend, we decided we had these bags of rice in the rickshaw. And so my boyfriend sat at the rickshaw, they opened the bags, and Mahesh told all the women, go and get your pots or your buckets and just line up and we'll just put the rice. So this went on for a while. So we got all the rice out. We brought toys. We were there for a while. Well, as we were leaving the slums, this woman, Indian woman, like runs out of her trash house, runs out screaming at us, falls on the ground and grabs, I'm gonna get emotional, grabs my boyfriend's feet. And she's saying something and she's grabbing my boyfriend's feet, grabbing his feet. And she gets up and she's bowing to us and she goes off, and Mahesh said that she said, what she was saying was that she had been praying because she didn't know how she was going to feed her family this week. And then we showed up with tons of rice. And I have these stories, and I remember these stories. Our little kid, whenever we bring toys to the slums, we have to damage them slightly because the slumlords will take them and resell them. So we have to damage the toys a little bit. But we had colored pencils, and this little like 3-year-old had this pink colored pencil, and this little boy was so excited about this colored pencil. Oh, it was his. It was his. And he ran around that slum all day. And as we were leaving, he had gone back in his little house, and he walked out and he had his pencil and like waved to us. And I thought, he's so excited for this little pink colored pencil. Mm-hmm. And here all the kids in the Western world have buckets of toys.
Yeah, bedroom full of stuff that they don't even play with.
I mean, my nephew, after my first trip, my nephew, who's now 12, he was really little then, probably like 4 then. I was in the kitchen with my sister, and I was telling her about the slums, and I guess Charlie had overheard us talk about they don't have any, there's nothing, because I was going through her kids' old clothes to see what I could bring to India to bring them clothes. And I guess Charlie loved Legos back then. That was his favorite toy. And he had run up to his bedroom, and we didn't think anything of it, but then a few minutes later, he came down with a sandwich baggie full of Legos, and he gave me the Legos, and he said, take this to them. And his little 4-year-old mind, just the fact that he heard me say that there are kids that don't have. And in his little 4-year-old mind.
Isn't that beautiful? That's just natural.
Yeah, he went and got his own
There's
Legos.
no filter at that age. They don't know any different, and they just hear that and want to give.
Yeah, his own toy. That was his toy that he went built to give me to take. He didn't even know where India was at that point. Yeah. To take to these kids. And so seeing the unadulterated like selfishness and grossness coming from some of these Telegram groups really put me off of the truth. I was like, you guys have no fucking clue how blessed you are. How absolute, and the fact that you're sitting around allowing yourself to get unhealthy, you're just refusing to pay bills because you think like you have the power in this country, in any Western country, to take your power back. You have the power to take your power back.
Yes.
There are people in this world
that just have nothing.
that have nothing, like
They're
literally
just trying to
nothing.
survive each day.
But you think you have it bad off?
Mm.
You better think
And
you're lucky stars every day. You were born in the United States of America and you have a blue passport. You better think you are lucky stars.
yeah, and I think a huge part of it is just the constant programming, just we just got so much thrown into our faces. I mean, I'm not excusing it at all, but we are just so programmed to consume more and more and more all the time. And it's just, I feel like it's just gotten out of hand. And and back to the Trump thing, I think Trump is amazing and I think he can make some amazing changes. But at the end of the day, he's only one person. I mean, he has a team of people behind him, and they can make some big, amazing changes. But at the end of the day, it really comes down to us as individuals and what we need to do. We need to do the work on ourselves in order to save ourselves.
Absolutely. Absolutely.
Yeah, we can't be looking out there.
And that's when I kind of realized like my place on YouTube probably there was a different purpose. Because I have been blessed to go to India and study all this. And now I do have a big platform so I can, with great power comes great responsibility. Isn't that a Spider-Man quote? And so I created these like global shadow work challenges. We started talking about this, telling people to exercise the body. You got to get in your body. The body is the vayu. The body is the pathway. It's the conduit, the soul. We were talking off camera now, hopefully this will help people understand this because you've been taught in the spiritual world by the corrupt spirituality that the body doesn't matter because you're a spiritual being. Well, Cindy, my friend Cindy, who we're actually going to speak to soon, she says it best: spirit is what you are, human is what you're doing now. Drop into your body. Your lower three chakras are your humanity. You got to be in your body while you're here.
And we choose to be here right now, so we need to embrace that right now.
Yeah,
and
we need to embrace these bodies are cool. These bodies are awesome, And I was telling you, Paula, we look at like the heart and heart health. Off camera, trained conductors are some of the most heart healthy people out there because they use their arms so much. They use their arms. So physically they have a strong heart. When we look at Anahata, the heart chakra, the energetic, the arms are energetic tubes out from Anahata. We have chakras in our hands that come from the heart. So when we tone the arms and we work on opening the chest through exercise, we're actually opening up Anahata. The physical mirrors the spiritual, and the spiritual mirrors the physical. When we have people who have low self-esteem or really struggle with like setting boundaries, I guarantee you, I don't even have to look at your body to tell you you probably have a weak core. We need to work on your core. Because Manipura is right in your solar plexus, all the way down to Muladhara in the pelvic floor. So we need to get into that core to strengthen your core in order to strengthen your right to be here, your self-esteem, how you set boundaries. We also have the bandhas, which a lot of people I noticed weren't even talking about the bandhas, but the bandhas, the chakras can't exist without the bandhas. The bandhas are like the lock that holds the energy in the body. And so we strengthen the pelvic floor, Mula Bandha, in order to be able to strengthen the chakras and strengthen that. And so energy, and the thing about it is, and I say this all the time, I think people very much misunderstand me. I'm not talking about being an Olympic athlete. Just go for a 30-minute walk. Get your blood flow, your oxygen.
Get the body moving.
Just get you have these we call vayus, which are pathways of energy. This is energetic pathways of energy in the body. And if they're stuck, if they're blocked, then your spirit can't move, right? And so a lot of what exercise is unsticking stuck energy, right? And we call it in Ashtanga, we call it the Mysore magic, because people we practice in a class called Mysore, and you see it all the time. Like I said, Ashtanga is a crazy physical practice, but you see it all the time with beginners. They come in and their eyes are wide watching a more experienced student practice with their leg behind their head. They're like, it's like they're in this their own little surreal Cirque du Soleil, you know, just watching everybody. And they say, "Oh, I'll never be able to do that." You know how many times I've heard someone say that, Paula? I'm never going to be able to do that. And I'm like, "Oh, okay, wink, wink, okay." And then a month later, maybe 6 months later, all of
Okay.
a sudden they start to realize, well, maybe there's a possibility.
Okay. Yep.
And then a year later, all of a sudden that leg's behind their head.
Wow.
And that's what we call the Mysore magic, is that your limitations, it goes back to the second sutra of the first pada, yoga chitta vritti nirodha. Yoga is getting rid of thought. Why? Because thought is what thought you don't believe what you think. Like your thoughts are not really real, right? So like you have put limitations on yourself. You have told yourself, "Oh, I'm not athletic." You've told yourself, I'm the fat kid, I'm the chubby kid." You've told
Mhm.
yourself these things. But that doesn't mean
I'm
they're
not a morning person. That's a
yeah.
common one.
Yeah, listen, I always say no one's really a morning person, but we get up anyway because that's just how it is. And then you get used to it, right? You get used to it.
Exactly.
So you start to prove yourself wrong. And people start to prove themselves wrong in the practice, and it takes time, right? And the body starts to change. We in primary series, when people start, we have this funny joke called Ashtanga because people usually drop a bunch of weight. But my boyfriend even says that, like, after a few months they start to walk into the shala a little bit differently. Their head's held a little bit higher because they're toning up and they're
Yeah.
feeling more comfortable in their body because it's working. It's working.
Yeah.
You know, the
And they
back.
probably have more self-esteem because they
Yep.
can notice those changes that are happening in their body. And it has an effect on
Yep.
everything. Yeah.
If you don't have your health, you don't have anything. And it also
Yeah.
forces you, because this practice is so intense, it forces you to be in your body. And so
Mm.
what's most of us are aware of our gross body, which is like our quadriceps hurting, our butt, the big muscles, the stomach aches. But then all of a sudden we start to notice the subtle body. And you can't notice the subtle body unless you're actually in your body. You start to notice like your pelvic floor region, like you're able to kind of travel deeper into the body to see these things, where they are, what's happening. Um, and you start to listen more to your body. You start to realize your body isn't something that's here to punish you. It's actually your greatest ally in this experience. Is the template of your soul's experience. And when the blood, we talk about the blood as being your sacred DNA, and the blood is the actual Shakti, the physical temporary expression of the energetic cycle. And so nothing is going to heal you more than your own blood, right?
Mhm.
And so when we have tight areas where fresh blood can't get to, when we unstick those areas and fresh blood starts to come in,
And it can start to heal.
we have more life force, right? We have more vitality. And we start to, and that's one thing Sri Swami Satchitananda says in his commentary on the Yoga Sutras, which is brilliant. The more you start to recognize your soul, there's two things. The more you start to recognize that you are not your identity, you're a soul, the more you recognize the soul in other people. So you become more kinder, more loving, more understanding person. You also, the more you realize that this life, this body isn't really you, it's an experience for now, you start to become more invested in it. It's like that roller coaster ride. Like when you go to the amusement park and you get on the Superman ride and you strap in and you're flying, in that minute, you're invested in that experience, right? You got on that Superman ride to feel that experience and to have that adrenaline rush and to have fun and to feel the wind in your hair. You're not,
And
when you're on
possibly vomit.
right, some people vomit. But if you're not, you're not thinking about what you're going to eat for lunch or like how much you hate your parents when you're in that moment, right? You're really
No,
invested in
you're
that.
there.
Now you're there. And so the more
Mhm.
you recognize that this is a temporary experience, the more you're here,
Yeah.
the more you're in it. And the more you can, I've often laughed about like when I leave this earth, we leave one day, like, should we leave a Google review or Yahoo review? Like, kind of weird people, but the fries are really good, like beautiful scenery. You should try, like you can really take a bite out of that cheesecake and really, and this is just a metaphor of life, just really taste that because it's here. When you're in spirit form, you don't need food, right? And for density positive, we don't eat through our mouths. We take in nutrients through our skin, according to the law of one. So if you're a foodie,
Okay.
enjoy it while you're here because
Yeah,
when
right.
the nutrients comes to us differently in the next density. So if you enjoy food,
Wow.
enjoy it. Enjoy that,
Yep.
while you're here. And
Don't
that's the
feel
same thing.
guilty about it.
Yeah, exactly. That's the same thing with exercise. Like exercise, yeah, we were saying off camera, I think they knew, I think the controllers of the world knew that people want to move, we're going to move anyway. And so they started this whole, like, when they started to indoctrinate us, I think they started this whole thing like exercise is to punish you, it's to be skinny. And
Mhm.
so we had an abusive look at our own selves with exercise, when actually it's the
Yeah.
opposite. It's supposed to liberate you. And it's supposed
Yeah.
to help you spiritually be in your here now moment. And I was telling you, Paul, as I started doing these shadow work challenges, even though my primarily discipline is primarily is Ashtanga, when I started to study this philosophy, I realized you can find this in running, you can find this in dance, you can find this in kickboxing, in
Yep.
walking. There's all these, and I created this workshop called the Alchemy of Movement, where we go through like every single, the cortisol levels, the anaerobic, the aerobic, what all these different like food, like a salad is going to have a different nutritional reaction in your body to like a baked potato.
Mhm.
They're both food, they both give you nutrients, but they're different. So
Yeah.
that's the same thing with exercise. We start to learn like cardio gives you this type of reaction, anaerobic gives you that type of reaction, and so you start to learn how these different forms of movement feed into your
Mhm.
psyche, into your spiritual experience, so that you become the chef and you start to create the meditation, the work, the spiritual. I mean, the root word of exorcism is exercise, your own shadow
Mm.
work. So
Yeah.
it's so fascinating. It's so fun. I love
And
the alchemy of
stuff
Movement is one of my favorites.
stuff definitely comes up when you're exercising.
Oh yeah, your
Emotional,
mind's like, no, 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 no.
physical. You get sick sometimes.
Yep.
Yep.
It's
Yep.
everything's purging. Everything is
Yep.
the mind is being
Detoxing.
challenged too. Like that's you listen, you're never gonna meet a better negotiator than your mind when you're on a long run.
Yeah. Yeah.
And that's interesting, right? Because your body's actually fine. Like, you're breathing, you have
Yeah.
oxygen. It's the mind, and
Your
that comes
mind's
back to
just fighting.
the false sense of self. Because when the body dies, the ego dies with it. So the
Yeah.
mind is part of that ego. It has a point. It has its point. It's a friction. It's like the resistance training. It has its point to play. You just have to
Mhm.
play it where it's supposed to be played. And
Yeah.
when those thought, and even 19 years later for me, I still have times where I mean, actually, if I'm being honest, probably every single day I exercise, my mind's like, ugh, I don't want to do this. But I know now,
Wow.
19 years later, that I just go, cool. I recognize
Okay.
this, but we're just going to do it anyway. Like I
We'll
like
do
to
what Tamara says. Cancel, cancel.
cancel, cancel. I always say, I tell people like, what would happen if you just stayed? Like when your mind starts to say, I don't want to do this, this is too hard. What would happen if you stayed in that work for just another minute?
Yep. And I've done that even with some of your exercise videos. And I've just had moments of like, oh, okay, I just want to turn it off now. I've got other things to do. And I'm like, no, just gonna hang in there. And you kind of get past that difficult
Yeah.
moment. And then you're like, oh, this isn't so bad, and you actually quite enjoy it.
And that's
But yeah,
that when you
you
get past that
just gotta get
difficult moment,
through
that's
it.
when the meditation happens, because the mind is now taking a back seat. Because the
Mm-hmm.
body is now creating. When you first start we call the first 7 to 10 minutes. I call it in my classes the initiation of practice. It's the warm up. Warm up is what we call it in the gym, but I like using it. You're initiating your body into the practice. So those first 7 to 10 minutes is where you're going to find the most backlash from the mind.
Mm-hmm.
But once you get past that, what's also happening is in those first 7 to 10 minutes, your body is actually creating the energy. So if it's cardio, it's using the oxygen to create the energy. If it's anaerobic, it's using the glucose to. So it's in that process of creating that energy. So you're having to really, that's why it feels kind of gross in the first 7, because you're creating that. But once you get past that and it starts to feel good, your body is now using that energy it created.
Mm-hmm.
And so it's getting past those points. And yeah, the mind starts to take it when you tell the mind to hush up for a second and you're just going to stay and we'll get to that laundry later or we'll deal with that later. The mind starts to take a back seat. That goes back to when I was running cross country. That's what was happening. That's what I didn't know it at 16, 17
Wow.
years
Yep.
old, but my mind was taking a back seat and I was in that's that active meditation, that flow
Yep.
of life force. And so yeah, and so I've done 2 now global shadow work challenges, which was so
Yeah.
fun. People all over
Mm-hmm.
the world, and I did all these different exercises because, again, you don't have to just do yoga. Like there are some days, you guys, when I wake up and I'm super shadow banned or something's happened, I go kickbox because I know I have anger in me. Like there's anger.
Yeah,
And so I want to get that anger out of me so
get
that
it
I
out.
can handle the situation rationally from a grounded
Yes,
perspective and not
in a
let my
healthy
emotions
way.
run away with me. The emotions are there. The emotions are always going to be there. We don't want you to be a psychopath, right? You're not a psychopath. You have emotions, right? But
Yes.
you have
And
to,
anger is good. It's healthy. It gives us energy and it
yeah.
drives us.
And
But it's how we behave and react.
yes,
That's what we need to work
you
on.
have to be responsible for your reactions. And so the
Yeah.
anger, I get that anger out kickboxing, and then I still have that anger, but it's a calmer, more organized way of moving forward with what. So I am in control of my reaction. We're
Yeah.
all in control of our own reactions, and that
Mhm.
anger, joy, all that stuff creates stress. Stress can come from good stuff too. Stress is energy. We're the alchemists. We have to figure out how to alchemize that stress in order to use it for good.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah. Well, it's been so amazing chatting to you, Brice, and hearing about your journey into yoga and the fun you've had on YouTube. It's been quite a journey. Yeah, I guess in the next week or so, we're going to be moving on to something new and exciting. You've got a new journey that you're going to be starting.
Yeah, with you. Yeah.
And yes, with me, we're going to be starting a new journey together, which is very, very exciting. And yeah, basically, we are going to be, we've set up a platform to help people who want to join us. We can help coach you along the way and help teach you how to heal yourself. And with all of the exercise that Brice, has been talking about, which is very, very exciting.
We got, oh yeah, and
Sorry,
your
I just got
meditations.
blood
We've got
pressure.
workshops
Oh,
on there.
yes.
I've done some courses on there. We're gonna, yeah, this, I'm so excited. It's like my friend Cindy calls her Shala a mystery school. I feel like what we're opening is actually a global mystery school
Yeah.
for people who really want to do the work. And it's that whole saying, you can bring a horse to water, but you can't make him drink. And this
Yeah.
platform is for people who actually want to take a drink, take a swig.
Yeah, who are willing to do the work
Yeah.
and want to learn and want a supportive community as well. Because at least, with this kind of a platform, we're connecting with people all over the world. And sometimes we don't always have the support network we want in our local community. So by having a platform that's online, then we can connect with people everywhere. And it's just so exciting. And we're just going to be offering all the tools and the resources. And yeah, basically, we are hoping to launch on the 20th of December for our new platform, which is very exciting. And we're going to have some special guests that are coming on for exclusive interviews as well.
We're
So,
gonna be talking
yeah.
about maybe some scandalous stuff on those
Oh,
interviews
yeah.
we can't post on
On YouTube.
YouTube. And so I've been laughing hysterically because I've been filming so many different exercise videos, and Paula has been testing them. Our friend
Yeah.
Alicia has been beta testing them too, and it's just been so fun. We're gonna do some live classes as well. Once like
Yeah.
once a month, some live classes with everybody. And so and as I always say, Paula, I tell people, do not compare your chapter 1 to somebody else's chapter 10. We
Yeah.
all start where we start. And it's not, again, the exercise videos there. I actually haven't done any of yoga videos, you guys. It's all, we're going to do an Ashtanga beginner course. It's going to be separate, but it's all been like, I've had so much fun creating like walking
Fun
videos,
aerobic. Yeah.
dance video, like all sorts of different stuff, fusion class videos with a lot of the bar stuff that just for you guys, that you have that library. So, and I think too, Paula, I think a lot of people, at least I've kind of learned this was never my issue. I think a lot of people, though, get nervous about joining a shala or joining a gym because they're not too super comfortable in their body and they're not comfortable with it. They think that people are watching them. I'm going to guarantee you nobody's watching you but the instructor or the teacher because they have to keep you safe. But I think with this, it gives people a chance to do this stuff at home.
Yeah, in the comfort of their own home.
Yeah.
And also just trying to fit around lifestyle as well, trying to fit things in if you've got young children, if you work different hours. It's just you can fit it in whenever it works for you, which is awesome.
Yeah, absolutely.
Yeah.
I've been creating these walking videos. I just did a 5K one, you guys, which is 60 minutes. I had so much fun doing it. But it occurred to me too, like even with today's climate in the world, especially for women, getting outside is great, getting fresh air is great. But a lot of women don't feel safe. being
No.
outside on their own. And I can understand that. Absolutely can understand that. And so this gives them a chance to not have to worry about that, about their safety, or if you're in a really cold place, or for Paula now really hot, you
Yeah.
know,
It's about 40 degrees today, so I'm not going outside.
you can stay inside in the air conditioning, because why not? We have that in the Western world.
It's very
So,
hot.
you can do it at home, and you can do it with your kids. Some of the stuff can be done, especially the shorter
Yes.
ones can be done with your kids too. With children, I always say, people ask me about kids all the time, depending on the age of the kids, like if they're under 10, let them come and go. Like their attention span is only going to be able to stick with it for about 5 minutes, and they're going to come and they're going to go, and let
Yeah,
them,
my
my
little
teacher used
Scarlett joined in this morning, and then she's like, "Mom, I'm going to go do my cosmic yoga now." And I'm like,
let
"Okay."
them, it's like playtime for them, right? So
Yeah,
it's only when kids get to like 14, 15, 60 that they can start to actually take it seriously. But that's
yeah,
kind of the fun of it. Like mom can do it or dad can do it, and the kid can kind of come in and do it and then leave and come in again. And it's just
it's
kind of,
flexible.
yeah, it's that's what it's about, because kids bodies are still in a different karmic state than our bodies are in. So, and their minds are in a different karmic state too. So is, and that's how healthy is that for kids, Paula, to see their parents actually
Yeah,
exercising for the right reasons, not to punish
yes,
themselves, but to start to have that conversation with your kids about how awesome your body is, and your body is a spiritual tool, and this is about you being healthy and getting vital. It's nothing about, even though weight loss will happen if it needs to happen, that's not why we're doing this, right? It's something deeper and bigger. So that's so great for kids to have that from a very young age, to have a healthy relationship with their bodies and with exercise, because they're seeing their parents develop healthy relationships with their bodies and with exercise. So I'm so excited. Should we
yes,
go tell
I'm
them what
very
it's
excited
called?
too.
Should
Yes, it's called the Esoteric Academy, and we're going to offer a very special discount code for our new members. So we will include all of that information in the box below.
Absolutely.
Very
Absolutely.
exciting.
Can't wait. I can't wait. And I want to hear, I'm going to tell you guys, let me hear from you. We're talking about this before, and I might do a poll too, but I want to hear from our audience, Paula, just in our comment section, and we'll poll later. What is your favorite form of exercise? What can I do to help
Yes,
you help yourself?
absolutely. Yeah. Yeah, we'd love to hear in the comments what kind of exercise you'd like us to focus on. And also if you have any meditation ideas, because I will be offering some exclusive meditations that will not be available on my YouTube channel. They'll be only on the Esoteric Academy. So if you have any particular meditations that you would like me to create, just please let me know in the comments.
I'm so excited.
Awesome. Well, thank you so much for joining me today, Brice.
I can't
It's been
wait. I can't wait.
wonderful.
We'll probably do follow-ups as well, you guys. I'm so excited. Yeah, I'm so excited.
Absolutely. Awesome. Thanks, Brice.
Bye,
See ya.
everybody.